My son's one day off, and not only does he have like two or three bands that he actively performs and records with in writing these songs, but he also has publicized several books, one novel that he kept editing down to where he has gotten it to the point where he can't edit anymore, and so he's trying to it's called Lethal Circuit. And if you're into sci-fi, or if you're not, it might be something to really look at, because he's giving away free copies so that he can gain entry into the readership board. But he's won two prominent titles, two prominent titles, and he's going for a third. Ironically, through the L. Ron Hubbard, but it's a prestigious category. And let's see, what else does he do? He also, he's their first brother right now. There's a divide between us. That, when I say between us, I'm talking about my family. My ex-wife is a real case. She's I don't want to get into like negativity, bad mouthing, but she's a real case, a real spiritual case. Like, and I'm not discussing her at all. Really, what was on my mind today was the fact that. So I started out wondering if my cell service was going to be on today. It's either going to be heavily interrupted. I'm surprised it's on, actually. Verizon's been cooler than they have in the past. I've had this one for 5-6 years. So it's been a very expensive trial. And just working my way back, right? We really can't stand outside existentially in judgment of other people. And even more so, you can't really tell what's going on inside people. So I started out this morning listening to the Inverted World podcast, or the call-in show. That's down below on community posts. I highly urge you to check it out, but it is, it's kind of like, reminds me of Danny Jones a little bit. If you're familiar with that podcast, like, you have this person who is completely clueless, not only to fundamental, I'm going to say fundamental physics and fundamental science can be figured out if you just work 60 hours a week as a dishwasher. And it just shows you what it takes to move through with fluidity in a universe that's constantly creating entropy, and you're dealing with all these substrates and variables and changes and nuances and moods, and and if you look down on that, you should try it sometime. I have. It's very demanding. Probably the commercial restaurant commercial style dishwasher is one of the hardest working people. That is typically the lowest paid and least entitled, or title has titles actually, but entitled, like, you have to totally be not entitled to work a job like that. And in some restaurants, they even tip those dishwashers out, because they're so crucial, to the pantry process, the fine cutlery and everything else. China. I mean, it really gets into stewarding and a whole different order when you're talking about fine dining. And I have worked for like world class resorts, long periods of time. I misspent youth, let's just say. So I mean, that really gets into what we're talking about here, is that some people who would be otherwise esoterically inclined were never able to do so because they were born into the slave class of a poverty-based system, right? And as I've mentioned before, my family came here in poverty. I literally got off the Palatine, the boat, in poverty. So when people were fleeing Germany based on a war, a 100 years war that was based around witchcraft. Yeah, I'm not making this shit up. And ended up here, uh, indentured, because somebody has to sign off and accept them, and then they have to work off their terrible ship ride their harrowing ship ride that they barely made it through, right? So there were 4 Marstellers that entered, and they came later with the Palatine. They weren't the first. I think the first ship load came 1706, and my namesake, my family, paternal, came between. I've even read books based on that and posted them up here, actually, if you go way down on the community posts. And I think they may be on esotericprinciplesoflight.blogspot.com. But you can look to the right on that blog, on the upper right column, and it'll have an entire history. Huge archived information with the link to this particular book that's based on the Palatine and the Palatine records, if that interests you. But it was between 1726 and 1728. And so we're talking about people who have been stuck, confined in the shackles of poverty, and kept there through very, complex measures, right? I'm just kind of like adjusting to my walk here. I haven't been walking as much, but I still get in really high miles every week. I just haven't been putting in as many miles. Walking to me is crucial. It really has kept my legs probably thinner than they should be, but I should be wearing shorts, and I should be focusing more on my calves and my thighs, because I'm not like an upper body king or whatever. I really enjoy training lower body. In fact, as a trainer, I can't express more, how I used to implement lower body movements, and really basing the entire program, mesocycle, for my clients around that, so crucial. And for some people with severe scoliosis or whatnot, many of my clients came from a myriad of different backgrounds. It was always interesting to try and figure out how to stimulate the same muscle fascicle response, right? And sometimes, when you're talking about an asymmetrical deviation there, believe it or not, sometimes you have to work with people where they have to strengthen one side or the other, or maybe they only have one side. Maybe they have one arm, or there's all sorts of different venues and avenues that have to be considered when you're looking at the kinetic process of the biomechanics of how people get through. And so this really does not deviate from, but it's a segue into what I'm talking about. Is that people are not only, they didn't only enter into this country, enter into life with certain handicaps, if you will. If you're to go by way of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and say this is what is required for the base level of just existence, right? Because many of us don't even get the opportunity to meet the criteria just to get the nutrients in that we require every single day. And even more so, there's a heavy burden placed on many people. And you can look, in families, you can look at it and go, this is really bizarre. Like, why is this kid sacrificing everything and miserable while this little spoiled brat over here is getting all the rewards of running around all hyper, hitting people? And then you see later, only in retrospect, really in the subconscious, the families, the people that you knew, that you grew up with, observing that that it all makes sense, and it's a tapestry that seems so complex that unless you are more liminally oriented or more aligned with the arcane, or however you want to deem it, um, that's also in there. That's inside of you, right? That's something that is not part of your body necessarily per se. That your body, with a lot of people, the physical self has to come into alignment with why the spirit was led to feel certain ways that seemed oftentimes foreign to the body. And whereas other people seem to be extremely placed with the body that their spirit seems to represent, right? To the point where they almost you almost have to look at it like, is this an NPC player, right? That's a really popular notion, but anytime you suggest one artifice, one article, one wing of behaviorism, you have to then see that this is going to become a science, you know? So we talk about the doxastic aspect of logic, looking at mathematics, looking at symbols, right? What a symbol represents, how everything can be really, you know, when we look at teleology and we look at causes and effects, our form here, morphologically, oftentimes does not coincide with the manufacture of what we later do or what we become, right? And sometimes there's bizarre situations that occur in a person's life where they thought they were going along, nothing to see here, folks, nothing to see here, and then all of a sudden some bizarre shit changes, right? A complete and total paradigm shift alters and changes their perception, and to some extent, the ontology, what we consider nature, blocks them out from their prior life and just enters them into this next segment, you know? And so I think this is what really gets people like Jacob Grinberg. I'm not going to do injustice to the subject. I have looked into it. It's a very interesting subject matter, but I urge you to go in and do your own deep dive on that if you're really. So it's Grinberg, Grinberg. And he was a Mexican physicist, scientist who wrote countless books. I think it was like a huge number of books, like something like 40 books or 40 published, large published data sets and information. And it's so bizarre to see people like this go toward what can only be deemed as termed the liminal, right? But then to see that, no, this is a full-on occult agenda, where this person has then, you know, really looked into the observer effect, gone beyond this, and saw this sort of Bohm or even Heim type inference of the mind pervading out into the existential. In other words, thoughts affecting the outside world, right? And this really does get into morphic resonance. And morphologically, you can't say that, like morphogenesis, right? That you've got this blueprint of said body that is going to, if it's exposed to the right nutrients, right? We really get into Dr. Michael Levin's work here, right? Is where nothing to see here, folks. You got this blueprint, genetic blueprint. There's the exposure to just enough nutrients. Sometimes, you know, there's a flourishing that occurs, right? And it gets into areas where, how in the F did this deviation happen, right? So, I mean, that's what drives science, right? It's like looking for the break or the link or the master link in that kinetic chain in a specific area of research or study, and going, okay, how the F did this happen, right? And then we want a clear cut, you know, like lenticular clouds, and, you know, there's always like, there's this explanation as to why something happens. And when it becomes a little too lavish, a little too opulent, a little too wordy, right? You have to kind of look at it closer and go, well, wait a minute. These highbrow intellectuals are playing linemen and actually being paid as henchmen to actually block out the information that willingly wants to become and amass with us and become a part of our culture, right? So in this era, we've come face to face, head to head with the flood of that information. That whatever was supposed to be trickling through and then matriculating along with our learning, right, as an anthropological method has now been seen, and there is an awareness that this information has not only been heavily modified and occulted, but it has been blocked. And so I believe that who would possibly be considered the adept. In other words, you get into the complexities of like torsion field energy, ley lines, even the Merkaba to some extent, right? This energy system, this flux that really not only encapsulate an electromagnetic or strong nuclear force field, but also gets into what is gravity and how does so-called shift or color, light, spin that affect our emotions, right? To jump way out there and to say, no, our emotions are actually a reflection, just like the sun through star birth. It sounds like I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm not. Produces 14 main elements, gold being one of them. We look at the vegetation on this planet, we see the different colors. We look at shift and we see how this photon collision speed identifies the differentiation of that color shift, right? And there's a myriad, there's a rainbow of shift, right? And it gets into the fact that this is expressed oftentimes, Len Horowitz, right? With the solfeggio and harmonics, that this is expressed through morphic resonance by way of harmonics, right? And that each of us could be said to have given off a certain sound or wave pattern, wave function, and that the spherical, or better to say, the sacred geometrical inference, the hieroglyphic monad, if you will, John Dee's work, right, that you can go really deep into, and the esoteric mathematics that are involved here when we're looking at signs, sigils, and the breakdown of that when we follow the trail of Metatron's cube and we see every sign, every sigil, at least most that we know of, contained within that energy spectrum or that energy sphere, which leads back to this postulate study of the monad, right? So to pull this, harness this back in and to pull it back on track is, who are you, right? Who are you in the grand scope? If we identify the grand scope as, okay, this is what geometry looks like when it's in order, right? Because you have inferences like the Mandelbrot set, right? That really looks complex, really incredible, actually, right? But as you're watching a computer generation of this, you're wondering, okay, that's really neat. It makes me feel really small. It sort of goes on like Google seemingly forever, has no particular end point, and yet does it have any congruence, right? Because here I am and I'm wondering, am I a self? Am I merely stuck within this refracting field, this flux of an unseen definition of a spherical body around me, and that is morphologically what's making me appear the way that I look, expressing myself in the way that I do, and giving myself certain attributes or really nuances of this is who I am and what what we come down to is the fact that no, those attributes don't even really cross correlate to one another. And it seems to be by design, right? That you would only be able to go so far. You would only be able to see so much, right? So it really works as more like a, Maxwell Planck, like a limiter, right? Where you have this absolute firewall that you come to where you can't go any further, right? So we are all predestined, predisposed to push beyond that barrier, push beyond the construct and the confines of mere interpretation. We scream out to the universe, each and every one of us, we are not limited. We are not a singular persona, right? Even that term that I posted up, like persona, what is it? Non grata. It's basically you are not wanted here. You're not allowed here. You are actually a pariah. You are ousted from the community. And that's the main tenet around the master key system that's written by a high-level Mason that became and is the basis to The Secret, in case you didn't know. I've read that book several times, and it invites you in to its cosmos, into its universal world, but it is based upon barriers, boundaries, prejudices. It even says in the beginning of that book that if you are not, so you are considered what they call in this book, the Master Key System, a theoretical abstract ego if you don't take on the persona of a title, a father, a brother, a mother, a sister, right? A lover, like you're supposed to play all these characters, right? And then many of us go, this is all bullshit. I'm not playing any of these characters, right? And you become non sequitur. You break off from the syllogistic absolutes and you realize, I'm not a choo-choo train and I ain't sticking on those tracks, right? And then you see what happens to people like that, right? So this really does get into a whole other area that I'm not going to discuss here, but if you want to know more about this and to know a little bit more about how this gentleman thinks, I would say I don't know anyone except for Michael Tessarian that really backs this gentleman up. But it's Ralph Ellis, and his view of not only Jesus or King Isis or Isis, but when those historical biblical events actually took place, to actually take real history and to look at this, right? And he got a lot of reflection from Neil with Gnostic Informant. In fact, Neil was so rude to him, so abrasive, is that you wonder if there's like some sort of demonic agent inside of Neil while he was doing this interview, because he was opening himself up to some really strange things. This is a few years back, and it's when Neil was very co-aligned with Amon Hillman, right? Who's a confessed known Satanist. And then you have other people in that tribe or in that group setting, like Jason Reza Giorgiani, brilliant, but also identifies himself as a Satanist. Basically, he's saying, look, when you, and I'm going to loop back around on this thought, I'm not going off too far, but when you, and I'm really talking about, just to encapsulate this, the rebel Jesus and the rebel Jesus crew, right? Because it helps us all identify the rebellion in ourselves, that you are not crazy, you are not wrong, right? So this leads back around to Jason Reza Giorgiani, right, where he's basically saying, I'm a Satanist if you have to reduce me in categorically and say, no, I don't believe in this, no, I don't believe in this, no, I don't believe in this. And then he postulates and postures a concept like Prometheus and gives you a name, a face, and even really tries to articulate a date, right? So I'm not trying to get you brainwashed or suck you into a world and say these people are 100% right. I'm not polarized either way. When I see I have a special gift that I have squandered away and even berated within myself, in the self-deprecation that I've done, in the way that I could see truth and I could see the flow through of truth. And I think when we're around people who are live by way of untruth and we are not exposed to any elements of purity or truth, you know, throughout my entire childhood, parents, siblings, everybody's a bullshit or everybody's a liar. And over the course, like I was talking about earlier, over the course of the unfoldment, the refraction, reflection back historically, you see it all. You see how these people ended up. You never would have thought that when you were a kid, right? That you'd never talk to a parent again, or that you would see them in a particular way and see through them. And if you knew what you knew now, you would have ran the fuck away, right? But that's the whole point, is that you were, through your own ignorance, you were given safe harbor. And that's really where we're all at right now. That's the moment in time that we're at, is that you can look over your, you can pretend that you're bored. You can look at the roof over your head. You can look at the food in front of you. You can think, how banal, how mundane, how boring. But inside that all of that can slip away, and very quickly there's nothing, there's not going to be anything banal, mundane, or boring about your life when you're out on the street. You have nothing, you don't even have food in front of you, and this is a very real event. And it creates this chasm, this dichotomy between, okay, if I follow along and I supplicate and I don't take on this rebellion, and I can't even identify particularly or name what this rebellion is, so what am I campaigning for? Well, that's exactly what causes people to go through what I would posture, right? In my posturing, to postulate, to emote the fact that that's what this world of conditional states is all about, is that it's a refinement field in operation that is supposed to bring you down to your knees. And even after you have capitulated, supplicated, miserably failed, corrupted yourself, you're still there. You still exist, right? I would even argue to say, even beyond the carnal or the corporeal death, you still exist. There's always a now what situation. And so we always want to come to this point of final synthesis where it's like, oh, we don't have to worry anymore. And it's like, no, the main subject matter is still in front of you, still in front of you now, still in front of you today. So how does this correlate to anything? Well, we have these social groups and these social cliques that are forming, that are called communities. And these communities are limited on the induction of outside information or influence, right? And there's a comfort level. Some people feel like they've risen up to this mind and they're joining this community to learn more about how these people operate. And they may have idealized a behavior of the main speaker, the main proponent, the person that runs the channel. They may resonate with people that are contributors to that channel, right? They may enjoy the comment section, but they've found some sort of commonality. There are other people who are regressive, and they are in that community and have been in that state of mind and have stayed stagnant in that state of mind, basically, again, capitulating or supplicating back to a form that they know they should have morphologically kind of, not going to say gone beyond, but I think the field is more of a flux, and the world as being and becoming, right? That it is about exposing yourself to the new information that you can handle. And if you want to look at this more in a mathematical sense, like a codified system, you're adding another zero or a one somewhere, and it's altering and changing the entire kinetic chain of who you are and your existence. So in stating this, we see that you're not just supposed to arrive at some place, some station. But when we look back historically, we see, and we can even look back in our lives and see that there were long periods of time of this type of stagnation. That it's still, that there are these farms where the biggest thing that happens is, the wind is going to blow from the east at this particular time during the day and rattle a few chains, or, spin that top a little bit, right? But that there's nothing more, no other indication that, and in this solace, in this peace, that's really what we're trying to get all right with what we would consider banal and boring, but we want to be sure that we are sufficient in the base subset of information so that we can live with ourselves, right? And that is really what community is. Community is about this exchange, and this is what is being exploited and has been exploited for the long in this country, and what this country is really founded on. So when you look at capitalism and the fact that capitalism is heavily linked to fundamentalist Christian notions, right? That is standing behind the interpretation of a scripture and saying, no, this is what it means, and I got this gang behind me to back me up, right? Whereas when we're more fluid and in a more fluid state, we will make the effort to see a particular statement from a variety of different, really what we would say parallax views, right? And they are not the popular view. And this is really what intelligence is. So, there's that area where, am I going to get lost if I question this, versus am I going to be this staunch, really single-minded person that esteems themselves as an individual, but is only able to really get, like I say, the artifices of this capitalistic system, to be able to have a roof over my head, have food in front of me, and that this is who I am, and I accept this, while inside your soul is screaming and dying because it vies to move and flux and become, right, a mass, give off, be involved with, isolate and be away. It's all those different attributes, and that's what the pantheon of these persona really are, right? And so maybe the goal, the end all goal, is to become persona non grata.